So I was thinking about last week, and I was thinking how to structure, how to like, because I had a few things I wanted to say to you. And I was thinking, I have a lower chakra conversation and an upper chakra
Okay.
conversation. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you, like follow on from last week, was like a conversation on like individual versus collective responsibility,
Hmm.
or whatever that is. Um, And the other one I wanted to follow up was kind of like broadly, like following on kind of the conversations around consciousness, because I'd been like diving into stuff and I had this like thought and idea about what consciousness was, which kind of aligned a little bit. And then in not serendipity, I keep getting those words confused. Synchronicity, like a bunch of videos got presented to me on YouTube, that it sounds I realized that what I was thinking about turns out is an actual consciousness theory,
Okay. Amazing.
called idealism. And I was like, oh wow, okay, let's see if we dive into that. But I thought it made sense to kind of start lower and go up. I was trying to figure.
Yeah.
I've
We'll
got two
start
topics for
start at the
you
root and then
and
rise up.
work our way up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, is that what did you want? What did you have anything coming to this conversation you want to chat
Similarly, I
about?
wanted to pick up on our where we ended last week, discussing this thing about uh like responsibility, what it is, where it lies. Um, yeah. I think we both had I think we both left thinking like, crikey, like what what is responsibility? Like what you know?
It was fascinating too because I actually thought we'd be fully aligned. That was
Yeah.
really interesting. I thought we'd be like fully, and I think you think I'm actually quite aligned with you on some of this stuff. I'm quite aligned with you, but that it was interesting that we weren't like fully aligned.
Yeah.
So I'm like with you 100% in terms of we do anthropomorphize companies and organizations. Like I used to work at Microsoft, and people say, "Oh, Microsoft is this and that and the other." And I was like, there's nobody called Microsoft running around the offices like high fiving Asim. Well done, Asim. Great job. You're one of Microsoft.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
there's no entity like that, and
Yeah.
it kind of makes, and it's kind of like it kind of, by anthropomorphizing companies and then making, if you think a company is good or bad, like whatever decisions and the activities you're going to try and do are just not going to do anything, because what does that really mean?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
like if you want to change a company, it, it, it's a company is a byproduct of the system that we live in. It's just a byproduct of the rules and our agreements for how we work. And so, if you once you anthropomorphize a company, say the reason that company is doing something bad is because it's somehow evil, you ignore all the systemic effects basically around it, and you ignore all the things that you really need to do to actually make a change, because you're
Yeah.
saying the reason we've got this problem is that person's at fault, rather than the reason we've got this problem is there's this system that we need to change, and this way of
Yeah.
working and this way of living.
Well, I think it's
So
quite clever
I do
because
agree with you on that front. Yeah,
yeah,
I
I
think
think
that's
in a
I think
way I think I said to you over email is this idea of corporate personhood, which is, where like the whole idea of like limited companies and things comes from, where effectively from a legal point of view, a company is a human being. Um, and therefore it can get in trouble, but the people in the
yeah.
organization don't get in trouble for the same
Yeah.
things. And it creates this really bizarre kind of distortion, sort of reality distortion. And that creeps into our culture, as you're saying, with this sort of anthropomorphization of companies and of brands and even of governments. And and I think on the one hand, exactly as you're saying, there's all these systemic things that when you focus on the organization as a being, you ignore the system that it emerged from. But equally, you ignore the actual real human beings who are within it at any point in time and have varying degrees of responsibility and influence. Um, and so you can have like, CEOs of companies who can come in and do amazing things, and then the company gets the credit, and they're like, "Oh my God, have you seen like Ben and Jerry's did this amazing thing?" And then it's like, well, I mean, when Ben and Jerry were running it, that might have been a fair comment, but
Yeah.
if they're not,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
different. Um, but then equally, you can have these other things where someone can be like, "Oh my God, can you see like BP did this terrible thing?" And it's like, well, actually, like there may have been people at a senior level that made those decisions and they signed off on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But you're not naming them; you're naming the brand,
BP.
and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so you're ignoring both halves. You're ignoring the systemic kind of causality, and you're ignoring the human
The the human
influence within that.
causality
And it's sort of a
influence.
bit
Yeah.
of
And the positive influence as well.
and the positive influence as well, exactly, for all the good things that can emerge and take place. So it's a strange thing, and we do it also. I mean, I think the word for this is a synecdoche, where you
Say
basically,
that again.
yeah, synecdoche, yeah,
Synecdoche.
yeah,
Right. Okay.
um,
Yeah.
where you talk about a group of something as if it's a real being. So, for example, we'll talk about, oh, Russia is bad. That's a synecdoche because, well, like, what is Russia? I mean, it's like, is it is it a group of people? Is it a like some sort of legal structure? Like, is it the people who run the government? Like, what is it we're talking about? So you're kind of, um, and so we do the same thing with companies. You know, we'll say like, oh, Exxon did this or Nestle did
But
that,
it,
and
but the same goes with like sanctions on countries.
mm.
You know, like, oh, the country is bad, so we're gonna sanction the country. And, you know, I don't know, is there a similarity there? I feel like it's deeply unfair that like the leaders of a country do something particularly bad and then you sanction it and kind of the people inside the country
Yeah.
aren't, like it's the same thing. You're like ignoring the people and are you synectifying a country and then imagine you're punishing a country, but you're just punishing a bunch of people
Well, I
the
think
same
that's
way that
it.
yeah.
And often you're not necessarily really punishing the people. I mean, maybe you are in some cases, but it's not targeted well at the people who are doing the things that you're unhappy about. And even on a
Yeah.
kind of a much tamer level, you know, you politicians, they basically make all these huge decisions on behalf of like entire countries. Even and then like Brexit is a good example. And and then whatever your opinions on Brexit are, the fact that like that the politicians kind of used it as a bit of a it's just a kind of marketing campaign, like, oh, I'll like try and flog them this thing because it might help me win the next election, and then it becomes this whole like fiasco. But then at the end of their term, they just walk away and they get like really lucrative consulting contracts and book contracts and things like this, and it's like and then you go to somewhere else in Europe and people are like, "Oh, Britain is so bad," and they left the European Union. It's like, no, Britain isn't. Like, that's the next key again, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we're just a
Yeah.
bunch of people with some like incompetent politicians, and we don't know what we're doing. Like,
Well, I think that was. I think I remember when Brexit, especially, it was like they Farage, Boris Johnson effectively won Brexit. I don't think they were expecting to win because Farage immediately stepped down.
yeah,
Right?
it's
He's
like
like, "Oh, we
crikey.
won! Oh, brilliant! I'm just gonna not actually be involved in politics now. I'm stepping down. I don't." Then Boris Johnson was like, "Oh, yeah, uh, yeah, I'm not gonna run for prime minister, to try and actually get us through this and let like a bunch of people like go
Yeah,
through it."
no
And,
responsibility.
no, and they're like, "Oh shiz, we won! Damn it!" The whole famous story about Boris Johnson having two letters in his desk, or one pro Brexit, one anti Brexit, and he was deciding on the day which one to put. So yeah, so there's this whole. So yes, I do agree that you know synectifying an organization and saying that an organization is good or bad at one level is perhaps just not even useful. Perhaps
Mm.
just not even useful at that level. Um, but we do have to acknowledge, though, don't we, that organizations, by definition, or collectives, perhaps by definition, do have, I don't know, a greater responsibility. Uh, uh, Despite the fact that we don't think it's accurate, there is a sense of truth to that. There is a sense
Yeah,
of truth to a
there is.
collective having its own agency, and as you as an individual in a collective, you can't just throw up your hands and say, oh, the company decided that, or like, no,
Mm.
you're part of the company. Oh, I wish I could have done something, but oh, my bonus. Like what do you, like there's too much of
Yeah,
you can't, if we can't anthropomorphize companies and we can't make them responsible, then companies, I don't think they should be allowed to say, listen, it's just how economics works.
yeah,
I wish I could be different, but I've got the shareholders. Oh, it's like a divorcing from an
yeah,
individual. You, yeah, there's a divorcing from the individual responsibility as well. Um, I don't know. There's something like one of
yeah.
the things I
It is
wanted
really
to, yeah,
difficult
go on.
because
Yeah.
that what I'm one of the things that sort of came to me when you were saying that was that there's also like a cultural inertia that an organization it is an organism. Like it might not be a person, but it is an organism, and that organism, even when you take, you change the CEO and you change a bunch of the staff, and you close down the main office and you move it to some industrial estate in Milton Keynes, like to save money, but
Past
ultimately,
history.
yeah.
Past history, that's all. Yeah.
No, no,
No, okay.
I haven't been moved to Milton Keynes, but
Okay.
but these things happen, and somehow that organization still has a certain culture that continues. There's an inertia there that like
Yeah.
continues forward, and people join that organization and somehow kind of morph into the organism that they've joined. And I think
Mm.
that's quite an interesting, it's kind of social phenomenon in a way, because it's like you can take the leader out of the tribe, but the tribe still carries on. They replace the leader with another one who fits the mold. Um,
I think you use the word, 'cause that's the word I use with, it's a tribe.
yeah,
It's kind of the ultimate tribe, isn't it? Because um, unlike the tribe of your country, like this is a tribe in the more traditional sense of you've got to be part of it. It has a culture. It has things you can say and things you can't publicly talk against your tribe.
yeah,
They'll ostracize you. They give you your share of meat and wheat to
yeah,
survive, right? And if you ostracize my tribe, then you have to find another tribe to go be part of. And these days, that's kind of easy, but so it's kind of like there is a very like tribal idea of being part of an organization. I know you've built up an organization and it's got like a culture, it's got
yeah,
like an idea around it. I remember when I was at Microsoft, um, there was something somebody said once, which I thought was very interesting. It was just like a really interesting statement. He said, he was making a statement about how, like a public statement in front of a whole bunch of people about how he was, a supporter of Microsoft. He's been there for quite a while, and he said, and I think it was like a saying that people at Microsoft used to say, which is like, you cut me, I bleed blue. You cut me, I bleed blue. Because I believe the logo just used to be a blue logo. Now it's got multicolored. So you
right.
cut me, I bleed blue, which is like, I am Microsoft.
Wow,
I am Microsoft. My identity is Microsoft. This is who
yeah,
I am.
that's amazing.
And so, but then that is an individual and of course, there's people who are kind of like floating in and out of organizations as well. But especially at the senior levels of an organization, what are they looking for? They're looking for people who aren't just like good at their jobs,
Yeah,
but who specifically care about that organization and want that organization to succeed, care about the culture and the values of the organization, care about what the CEO has said, and actually tries their hardest to like implement it and kind of like recognize that leadership structure. So there are kind of like people inside organizations for whom it is, a full on identity.
yeah.
Do they have more responsibility regarding more accountability regarding, can they divorce themselves from the aggregate harm that an organization does? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think there's so this comes back to something I said to you in over email, that I had a chat with a guy I met in a crop circle, interestingly.
Oh,
called, which we can,
your background is
which
crop
we can cut,
circling. That's
which we can crop
you.
circle back to
Yeah.
if you want to. Um, but James Latimer is this like super nice guy and really wise. And I had a call
Yeah.
with him last week, and he said to me, um, "Responsibility is your ability to respond." And and
Mm.
and it was struck me because I wrote an article last year where I was like looking into the origins of the word responsibility, and it actually comes from like the Latin respondere, which means to return a promise, which I thought was really beautiful in
That's
itself.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But then this idea that actually, okay, well, it might literally mean that, but it sounds like your responsibility. And I love James's idea that it's your ability to respond, because I thought, well, it's kind of a fundamental truth in the sense that if like you have a certain limit to like what actions you can take in any situation. And and so that's like the boundary of your ability to respond. And within that, you can make good decisions, bad decisions, um, decisions that are good for just yourself or a small group, or decisions that are like good for the whole collective. Um, you know, however you want to define that. But outside of there is somewhere there's an invisible limit of like I can't control that. That is outside of my
Mm.
ability to do anything about it. And and that's different in every situation, which is why it's sort of difficult to grapple with. It's sort of amorphous, but I did like this idea that like yeah, like in any situation. So let's say I work at Microsoft. Microsoft might make some decisions that I'm completely unaware of. You know, like so when I say Microsoft, the synecdoche, I mean like it's like let's say the board of
Well,
directors
no, you can
decide
say
they're going to make.
Microsoft does, as an aggregate, make decisions. I think
Yeah,
that's a
exactly.
bunch of
So I
people.
might
Yeah. Yeah.
work in like some design team somewhere, and
Mm.
somewhere else in the organization, they decided
Mm.
that they were going to make 1,000 people redundant. And, you know, whether that's a fair decision or not, you had nothing to do with it. You didn't even know. You just find out because there's some memo that goes around, or you get invited to some call with the HR department who inform you. And so that is something that happened at Microsoft, but it was not your responsibility, even though you worked for Microsoft, because you literally had no ability to respond to like in terms of the making of that decision. Your ability to respond is how you respond to the information that came in informing you that that decision
Yeah.
had been made. And then it's like, well, what do I do about that? Um, that's sort of that. But the people who were in the boardroom making that decision have a responsibility because they were sat there saying, like, okay, we have a choice. We can decide this.
Yeah.
And they have to weigh up like the all of the different factors from the financial to the like the human impacts of what that might mean. And how not just what they're going to do, but how they're going to do it, and that's all within their control. Um, and so that is their responsibility.
But this, like, have you? I was researching the topic of a public benefit company. Have you
Yeah.
heard the term public? So I mean, there's B Corps, but then there's like a legal definition in the US of a public benefit company. And I was researching it for some reason because I was kind of like trying to figure out. And I run a non-profit. There are like for profits. What is a public benefit? Is it something in
Hmm.
between? Is it what is it? What is the actual? Is there different tax? Three things like what is it? And it really surprised me because it's basically a tiny change. It's very little change from like just any other for-profit corporation. The only difference between a public benefit company and from a US perspective and a normal company is a public benefit company in its incorporation documents uh, explicitly states the benefit that it is being created to maximize, right? So it publicly states it. Now, the reason it states it is because, and I think it's interesting the reason it states it because it tells you really how companies work. The reason it states it is so that shareholders in the future, like if you say you're a public benefit company and your purpose is to uh, reduce climate change, then in the future, if you make a decision which kind of m- puts planet over profit,
Mm.
in a normal company, the shareholders can go, no, it's profit. End of story. You're not doing that. Fire the CEO. Kill it all. You're doing the profit. The public benefit company, the board and the CEO has like protection,
Yeah.
and they can say, no, you can't. You literally can't. We are a public benefit company, so our purpose is to do that. So it stops shareholders from being able to uh, force a company away from doing public benefit. It gives them a little bit of defense. And the fact that that exists means that two things. It kind of like acknowledges the fact that who's, you work for a company, but who's in charge of it? Who
Mm.
does it even matter what you think as an employee? It doesn't really matter, does it? All that matters is what the shareholders think. And it also puts the question like any long-term statement that any CEO could even provide of a company, it doesn't really matter because the shareholders can any
Yeah.
point can just say, no, we don't agree with that. You're out.
I
Somebody
think
else
that's
is in.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've seen that with some of the big companies like Danone, for example, had Emmanuel Faber was the CEO of that, and he was quite like he was really progressive in wanting to sort of transform Danone as this huge conglomerate into a company that had a public benefit in terms of it being like a
Yeah.
leader on kind of environmental and social practices that were ahead of like he wanted it to really be ahead of like what the norm and and sort of lead the way and he did some interesting things. They got some of the subsidiaries certified as B Corps and so on. Um, and then and then he got pushed out, right?
Yeah.
So
There
and
you
then Danone just went back to being Danone, like
go. Yeah. So like, I mean, it's almost like so like organizations and corporations are just a manifestation of a bunch of shareholders. That's all
yeah,
they are. They're profit making vehicles for shareholders. And anytime you're told anything different, it's kind of a lie.
yeah. In the
You
case
know,
of in the case of
because of
organizations where
non.
they have commercial shareholders in that way,
Yeah,
obviously there's
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
co-ops and
yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah. True, true, true.
non-profits of various sorts
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so on. But yeah, I agree. Um, I think that's I think that is broadly true, and I think that comes back to this sort of systemic thing of like how is the system designed and why and who designed it? Because
got it.
underneath what we call the economy are basically a set of rules, and that set of rules includes things like the ability to float a company on a stock market and how that works
Yeah,
and who is able to like trade on that stock market and how they do that and what rights that gives them. Um,
but
yeah,
it kind of really devalues. Like I'm actually reading a book by Stephen Keenan. Stephen Keenan? Yeah, called Debunking Economics. It's 1,000 pages long. Oh my God. It's so hard. I'm really getting distracted very easily from things. I'm 13% of the way through. But as you can imagine, he's like a really critical. He would hate to be labeled an economist because he is deeply critical of economists. And as I'm kind of like reading through his book, and he's like very just simply like breaking down what economics is, um, you start realizing that economics is not really a science. It's far closer to a religion. It is just crazy. But the one sentence he had in that book that was really interesting, he was like describing like how do you actually um, combat kind of the information that we're told about the way the economy works, which is and the way organizations are a byproduct of how we think, what we think economy is, and what we think is actually going on in the world. And all that economy is a model that's kind of pretty neoclassical economics is really just a flawed model for how the world works. Everybody's trying to optimize. But he had a sentence in there that was really interesting, which was, "What we need is a vigilant and informed public." It's kind of a vigilant and informed public. Then I was thinking, like, is that kind of the responsibility of you inside an organization? Because there's you as an individual, is your responsibility to make sure that you're vigilant and informed. And then if you're inside an organization, it's your responsibility to be vigilant and informed regarding what it is that your organization is doing. Because I don't think it is okay that you can just put up your hands and go, I just was unaware of these activities of my organization. I know
Mm.
I'm quite involved. Like when Microsoft had like a very large kind of employee activist community, and people have always like talked about kind of Satya Nadella and Microsoft's kind of green pledges that they made kind of several years ago, and I'm like, forget Satya. That had nothing to do with Satya. I mean, that was not that was basically I argue that that was a very activist set of employees that made it very clear to leadership that actually this is something that's important.
Mm.
Their employees really wanted it. Their employees were very knowledgeable. In the town halls, they would like ask Satya a question, and it was always an uncomfortable question. It was never like a fluffy. It was always an uncomfortable question which he had to answer about Microsoft sustainability commitments and this and that and the other. When you look at kind of other like Amazon employees for climate justice, I think Google's got a similar one. Um, and I think it's just, you know, I don't think it's okay anymore to just be an employee of a company.
I
I
agree
think you
with
have to
that.
treat it as a tribe, and you have to treat it like there's politics inside it, and you have to engage in the political discourse to change the culture of your tribe. I don't know, like that. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I would say I don't think that contradicts what I was saying earlier about like the boundary of responsibility because I think for example in that case that was it within their ability for those employees to get involved in
yeah,
those groups and actually push senior management for things that they believed were important.
yeah.
That was within their boundary of control, and I think a lot of people maybe lie to themselves that the boundary of control is very, very small. It's like it's right here. Like I just enter numbers into this spreadsheet, and and there's nothing I can really do to control this organization. Whereas actually, using your voice constructively to try and improve things, I think is yeah, there is always a
Unionizing.
boundary somewhere of like how far you
Yeah,
can go, but it's probably always a lot further than you think it is.
yeah. Or together. I mean, I
Yeah.
know companies are actively, some organizations actively uh, do actions to stop employees from kind of banding together and collectively bargaining with the leadership.
Yeah.
Which is again why, like, I'm just like, why I was like, going back to that conversation we had last week, it was like a very specific example, like, who's to blame? It was kind of, we were talking about blame at the time. It was like, who's to blame? And I just felt like very, um, uncomfortable with the idea that I'm gonna share an equal, even if with us collectively, like equal amount of responsibility with me versus I think they do have significantly more responsibility because of perhaps their power
Yeah.
and their ability. They're just so much more than an individual. Um, but then again, if a company, and then if we just say, oh, a company's just a bunch of individuals, then it kind of like there is a certain agency, there is a certain set of individuals that run the company that would then like they want like it would be a dream of an organization to say, listen, it's not a problem. There's just it's all your problem actually. It's all
Yeah.
yours.
Yeah.
It's yours. If you're just made up, we're just made up of people like you. So if you wanted us to change, we just need more of you here. And that's not true because there's shareholders that are actually really running the company, and then there's like a hierarchical leadership full of people who are significantly more power. And so yeah, I felt uncomfortable. I just couldn't line up with
Yeah.
that.
I think where I
Yeah.
was at with that was more just challenging the binary nature of it. That it's like, oh, it's like aviation emissions are the airline's fault, for example. It's like, and that there is a it is a bit of a hodgepodge of things whereby there are multiple players who all have responsibility, and you could probably plot them on a graph somehow, and some would be bigger than others.
Yeah,
But it's not
yeah,
like one is 100% and all the others are zero. It's that there's, it probably is like, like you'd have the CEO and the board of directors of that airline maybe having quite a big chunk. But then behind that, you may have like some, I wouldn't even say general shareholders, not general shareholders like you've got some shares in your pension invest in that airline. Maybe that's like that's probably a microscopic bit of responsibility, but there's probably some big institutional investors like the actual pension fund managers themselves, BlackRock, all these kind of organizations probably
yeah.
actually have quite a lot of influence over that airline, um, as well as like other well, yeah, and then you've got the employees, you've got the customers, you've got um, other organizations that are like competing with them in a way that kind of sort of shape what they feel they have to do. And so you've got this sort of plot of responsibility where some blobs are bigger than others. And your blob might be a little dot, somewhere.
Yeah.
But it is a dot. It is on the chart somewhere. Um,
It's on the chart, but I suppose where I rejected it is like the like there's a different. I was watching something the other day. There's a really it was really it expressed it really well. It was there's a difference between freedom and agency. Like we're currently free in the UK to vote for either Labour or Conservative. You're you've got democracy. What are you complaining about? You're free. But we don't really have agency because we can't really like change. We can't you can't really change anything. It's like, hey, I've got a gun to your head and say, hey, you're free. You're free not to give me your money. I'll just kill you. But you've got the freedom, right?
to
So
choose
it's
not
like
to, yeah.
to choose. You've got the freedom. You can choose to die or live. So like, so there are these kind of like false freedoms that we're given. So like when we're talking about the airline example, like what is, yes, as an individual, you're free to choose to fly or not fly. Um, but you don't really have agency in terms of like, well, no, actually, I want to fly, but I just kind of want you to do it properly. So, do you see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? There's like,
But
it's like there's this. I don't feel we've got. I don't think individuals have agency, or maybe collectives have far more agency. Maybe it's a if you have more agency,
yeah,
then you have more responsibility or something like that.
I think we have more influence than we realize though. And I think it's in a way it's the individualness with which we perceive ourselves that makes it feel like we have nothing. Because individually, like if I don't take that flight to Dubai, it doesn't really make any difference.
Doesn't really make.
Someone
If I
else is
don't
going to buy
vote,
that ticket.
yeah,
That plane's going to go anyway. Doesn't
yeah,
really
yeah,
make any difference. But if I'm part of a culture of masses who say, you know what, I'm gonna fly less, whatever that means. That actually sends a meaningful signal to the whole of the airline industry that like, oh, people don't want this as much anymore. And if the message coming from that group of that collective is the reason we're doing this is because we're concerned about the environmental impact in this case, um, that then is a signal to them to say, well, okay, we want more people to fly and people are stopping flying for this reason. So we need to put pressure on Boeing and Airbus to like help us solve this problem. And um, in terms of technology and so on. So, I think there is a ripple effect. And the example you gave earlier of like Microsoft and its sort of its activist employees, like that's probably a good example of where individually, like those people might have had a voice and they might have said things like within their team or to the line manager, but they might have, if they were just like some individual isolated people saying things, it might not have really changed much. But then
yeah,
because they came together and actually started like becoming an organism of their own in a way. Um, that organism, a collective organism, and started to actually have a meaningful amount of power to change something.
Yeah, but it's just if you go back to the example of flying, it's like the only signal that you can give to a company is to not give them money, which effectively means not flying.
Mm.
Do you see what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah.
so it's like the only, I think it's closer to the analogy I was saying where I've got a gun to your head and say, oh, you could choose to die or give me your money. It's kind of like closer to that analogy than, hey, look, I have to fly. Like, there's no way of me clearly signaling to a company, to an organization, look, I want to fly, but I really effing hate what you guys are doing. And I want you to go fix it. But I still need to fly.
Mm.
Because the other way around is like because this is one of the issues with organizations when they have optional green options because they're
Yeah.
like, hey, we're green, we've got the really dirty thing that if they don't care about climate change, they'll take that, and we've got the green option. So we're just letting the market decide because markets work, and we've done our responsibility. Whereas their responsibility is like by default just to be more responsible. Um,
Yeah.
you know.
No, I know what you mean. Like, for example, I mean, I don't go on many flights, but I have been on a fair few in the last 18 months, and when I'm booking tickets, it's really annoyed me at the checkout process. Like, would you like to add an extra 12 quid to like offset the emissions from this flight? And I've said no in all of those cases because it's kind of
Oh,
annoyed me. And I've been like, I don't even trust that the organization you're going to give that £12 to is a
is
legit
even going to
organization who's
yeah, yeah,
going to
yeah,
do something
yeah,
good with it. I'd rather,
yeah.
if I'm going to give £12 to somebody, I'll give it to some like grassroots organization. But it has irritated me. Then I thought, like, the flight's like £1,000, and you're making
Why
me,
can't you spend 12 quid
yeah, and you're
on? Why can't you
charging me
take
like
12 quid less
60 quid to
profit?
choose my seat, and then you know, and then
Yeah,
and then you're like, oh, but if you care about the environmental impact, you've got to pay 12 quid extra for that.
because it doesn't cost much. That's the thing that's
It doesn't
crazy.
cost
It
much,
really
no.
doesn't cost much.
But what I would
It's not
say,
a big hit.
just to kind of flip the argument back the other way, is that
Yeah,
I don't think that like offsetting flights actually is the answer to like solving the environmental impact of flying. And I think that
as
is a
in
more challenging problem that
just
there's
to
not
give
an
a
easy
just
answer to. Like it does require airlines and like manufacturers to kind of get together and say, okay, like we need to actually pursue like a new era of aviation, like clean aviation, in a more serious way than just kind of like incremental improvements in like fuel efficiency, which they're doing. It's like, okay, that's good, but I know you're doing it because fuel is expensive. It's one of your biggest costs.
yeah,
And so like if you can get a plane that's like 10%
yeah,
more fuel efficient, then like you're
yeah,
you're
yeah.
gonna
There's other
go with that.
reasons for it.
You're not
Yeah,
but I think to actually leapfrog from incremental improvements to like actually really crack the problem would
yeah.
require a big investment and a huge, like, in a way, a kind of a leap of faith in like, let's really develop a new technology rather than just like incrementally refine the one we've had for decades and decades. And I think that is something that you can't solve it overnight, but you need, yeah, I don't know, like somehow I do think the airlines have a responsibility to like make that commitment in a serious way, not in a like greenwashy way where they say that they're committing to developing something that they never develop, but actually like really go for it. And I agree with you that like customers don't really have a voice in that at all, other than to not buy a ticket. And even that's not really a voice because you never get to send them a message as to the fact that I was gonna buy a ticket but I didn't, and here's why. Right? They just don't.
I was gonna buy
Yeah,
the
right.
money. I was
I
gonna
mean, if you
buy.
don't,
It's not
you
you.
don't buy the
Yeah,
ticket. They basically never knew you existed.
yeah, yeah.
So it is a tricky one.
Well, I think also just okay, coming back to what you're saying. So yeah, so and also like, uh, is this argument even the argument we need to be like having? Does that make sense? Because it's like we're still at the if all that a company is a byproduct of the system, like I think it was donut economics that kind of really started to introduce me to the idea that wow, economics is broken
Hmm.
because it talked about it said something about we all always talk about externalities, like negative externalities, negative environmental externalities. And that's basically what the issue with flying is that flying has something called a negative environmental externality. But what does that really mean? Like, what does that really truly mean? It means that um, there's a model that explains how economy works. And unfortunately, that model doesn't really model the environmental impacts
Hmm.
of some of that stuff. So they called it, instead of saying, oh, our model just seems to be a bit crap and it doesn't really include it all. Oh, let's just call it an externality. Yeah, it's something that happens outside of our model. And I was thinking about that and I was thinking that's basically like Newton, what's the name? Newton, uh the Apple guy. Anyway, Newton,
Isaac.
Isaac Newton, like sitting down, like an apple falls down, and he goes, I've bloody got it. Gravity. And he groans over, he goes, everybody, I've got it, gravity. Oh, it's brilliant. Now, apples always fall down. Sometimes, like, oranges go up, but don't worry about that. That's just an externality. That's just an externality. Well, gravity is definitely the right thing. I'm 100% about it, but like sometimes like a pig will just like float up into the sky. It's like that's economics for you. And so like because the environment hasn't been modeled in this model of economics, of course a company is then just gonna ignore it. It's just gonna
Yeah.
ignore the environment. They don't have it's just like, well, these are all the variables I care about, and then these are all I'm told to maximize this number, and I'm just going to go and maximize this number. I don't really care about this number because it's not modeled in the economy.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm kind of diving deep into economics these days because I'm like, my God, it all just seems to be um every problem I go down to, I'm like, right, it's just if it's systemic, then the systemic problem is this model of our economy is just
Yeah.
fundamentally broken.
And there's
Yeah.
this there's a lot of work that's been going on for a long, long time to expand that model to include all of these externalities. But those models nearly always come back to trying to value other things, non-monetary things, in
Yeah.
money.
In
And
money.
it's
Yeah.
like it's a bit of a circular
Yeah.
thing where it's like, oh, in order to get companies to change their behavior, we've got to put a monetary value on like, pollution or cutting down trees or like people's like the health impacts of pollution and these sorts of things. And and that makes sense through the lens of the culture we're in where everything is measured in money. But actually it doesn't make sense because still when it comes down to it, those companies look at it and they're like, well, yeah, okay, you've given me a report and you've told me that like the negative impacts of what my company does are like, you know, £800 million, but I don't have to pay that £800 million, so I don't really care. And
Yeah. Oh, the social impact of carbon. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right, and then
yeah.
sometimes you get governments who then put in place various policies and taxes and things to try and like force that kind of lever and say, oh, like a sort of some sort of carbon tax type thing, or even just like fuel taxes and stuff,
Yeah.
like cigarette taxes. In a way, they're trying to put a measure on that and say, well, we're
They're
going
just
to
trying to get more
retrieve that money
taxes.
from you for the
What
negative
they're
impacts you're
using it
having.
for? It's not they take that money.
No,
Not they take the
exactly,
cigarette tax and go, oh, let's pump all that into the NHS. I don't think that like,
exactly, and I think that's the
yeah,
thing that like it doesn't like if you look at it as plumbing. Even if you are going to take a purely monetary approach, you've got to join up the plumbing so that the it goes back round to the place it's meant to go and doesn't just get siphoned off somewhere else and fund another war or,
yeah.
something
Well,
stupid.
these there's because we're getting into that topic. There's one other thing like I wanted to broach with you. It's not broach. It's kind of like it's one of my It's one of my first principles that for me has had the most explanatory power. Like, as soon as I adopted this first principle, and it took me a while to really adopt it because it's a hard one, but as soon as I adopted it, it kind of like explained the world to me. Like,
Okay.
explained like everything that I'm like that feels very wrong. It explained it all. Um, the saying is this: um, the only purpose of government is to take public money and give it to private hands. The only purpose of government is to take public money and give it to private hands. I'm 90% sure it came from Noam Chomsky. I'm 5% it might actually be Russell Brand. And this 5% I actually it might have been me. I've actually tried to like find like the Noam Chomsky. I just have this memory of it. I tried like hunting through his old videos. Not the not the new not the new it wasn't the new Gandalf-esque Noam Chomsky. He was a bit younger.
Yeah, yeah,
But anyway, but I couldn't find it. And it took me a while to like really I think we can all accept that, there'll probably be examples of governments who, have taken public money and not been good with them and given it to private. But it's that the only purpose of
yeah.
government is to take,
Yeah, it's intriguing, isn't it?
yeah.
I
And when
mean,
you go back, how many examples can you think of when you go back? You think of the global financial crisis. Suddenly, banks needed a lot of money. We suddenly took a whole load of public money and gave it to private individuals. Then austerity for years. That was our solution in the UK. Austerity for years, which is again kind of taking money away from people. We can dive into COVID. So COVID was the biggest transfer of wealth
yeah,
from the biggest transfer of wealth since the birth of time, from the poorest to the richest. Um,
the
we
abolition of
just took.
slavery was a huge transfer of wealth to the already super wealthy.
Was it? I had no idea
Yeah,
about
I
that.
mean, basically, the abolition of
Yeah.
slavery came. I mean, there were multiple factors for the abolition of slavery, which included like the shifting culture and it no longer being kind of considered acceptable. But um, it was also coincided with the Industrial Revolution, where machines were increasingly a better way of getting work done than human slaves. And so what happened was that the governments, British government in particular, but also like French government and so on, um, paid the slave owners to free their slaves and paid them a huge amount of money by those days standards, and um, they then had that money to invest in factories, machineries of the Industrial Revolution, and so on, to continue maintaining their wealth and power in society. Um, and to make it worse, then it's like, well, where did the government get this money from to pay all these super wealthy people to free the slaves? Well, they borrowed it from banks and from super wealthy people, and then
Yeah.
paid them interest. And the British government apparently only finished paying off the the, the loan
Yeah.
in, I think it was 2015. And
Like a two.
I can't quote the exact date,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it was
yeah,
really, really recent, and it was because of
yeah.
like there's been this rising, um, there's been, with Black Lives Matter and so on, there's been this sort of rising tide of people looking back and saying, hang on, what the hell happened? Like, we still haven't finished cleaning up like those past wounds, errors, whatever you want to call them. Um, and it sort of came to light that this debt was still being paid. And it was basically a perpetual loan. The way the debt was structured was it was perpetual. So you just keep paying every
But
year, and you
you're
can
never
pay
never
off the
paying down the
principal,
principal.
but it's kind of like an interest only loan where you can just never pay it off. So you just keep paying just every year. And to be fair, not really fair, but contractually, the amount that they were paying in like recent times because of inflation was relatively like small
Ah,
amount of the
right.
government
Okay.
budget, and probably
Yeah.
didn't make much difference to the super wealthy people who had the loan notes that were still getting
But 100
paid, but
years
they were
ago.
still getting paid
Yeah.
for abolishing the slaves, even like, recently, which is, so yeah, so even slavery was, the abolition of slavery was just the government using that thing. Okay, the public are
Public
pushing for this
money.
thing, and we
Yeah.
can kind of turn this and manipulate it to meet our own needs, where we can like get some public money to transition into the industrial revolution, as well as like, you know, basically make some money through the banking um, transaction of that as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think, I mean, I basically agree with you that if you look back through the history of government, I think it's basically very, you know, it goes all the way back to kind of like um, sort of warrior chiefs and so on who were controlling tribes um, for their own gain, and and gradually over time, this evolves into like small city states and so on, and it grows and grows. But the dynamic doesn't fundamentally change. You still basically got a powerful elite who are basically got this kind of, like you were saying about foisting bargains. They're basically saying, look, we'll give you like food and protection in return for your obedience and labor.
Well,
And
I think originally it wasn't even presented like that. It was like, pay me or I'll kill you.
yeah, yeah, the threat
Yeah.
of violence. Yeah,
Pay me a threat of violence or I'll kill you. And then eventually it's like, oh, by the way, let's just call that taxes.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then that just evolves and it scales and it scales until you basically. I mean, we talked about Greek democracy, I think, in like episode 1 or 2. Um, but Greek democracy was like an anomaly for about 180 years. But all basically everywhere in the world throughout history, other than indigenous tribes, all kind of what you'd call like established civilizations. I'm not sure how I feel about the word civilization, but
Mm.
anyway,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
uh, they all basically just operate by this kind of tyrannical model. And then you get the emergence of like modern democracy, um, sort of in the Enlightenment period in Europe and America. But even then, you look at it and it's like, okay, but what you have is you sort of have through industrialization and so on, you have this sort of rising middle class and industrialists who then sort of start to have some financial power that challenges like the church and the and the state and so on. So you've got sort of rivaling power groups, but they're still elite power groups. Um, and then and then you look at the emergence of democracy and like the parliament and so on. It wasn't like they didn't create like the British Parliament to give people a vote. They created the British Parliament to give um, like industrialists and like wealthy people, like nobles who were not royal,
Mm,
like to
mm.
give them like to feel that they had a bit of a say in things. And then gradually over time, they basically sort of expand the vote. But like full suffrage, I think didn't come in until like 1928 or something, where like women and men both had the vote. And I think it may have been like at the age of 21 or something. I think it was like this much later when it got reduced down to 18. Um, so this idea that like Parliament and like our modern system of democracy was created for the people to give us all a say. It's like that's never where it came from. It was
Never
basically
been that. Yeah.
powerful, wealthy people kind of fighting among themselves, and
Yeah.
then saying, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, let's create some system where we can all feel like we've got a bit of a say in things." Um, and then, like to be fair, the general public with this rising middle class, like also starting to say, like, "Well, you give us a bit of a say," but then they sort of twisted it to make us feel like we're now in control. And actually, like, well, we never were, and we're still not. The whole system is designed so that you, like you said earlier, like, well, okay, yeah, we've given you control now. You can choose to vote for Labour or Conservative. But actually, the system is
Yeah.
wealthy elites, whether they're royal or aristocratic or industrial or church or like whatever group they're from. It's like it's they're basically negotiating amongst themselves, like what they want and need to happen, how they're going to
Yeah.
design the system, what laws and regulations and things will come in. And the public have probably more influence than they've ever had because of like various factors that have led us to be able to campaign for things in the same way that you were saying at Microsoft, like people have come together in like collective movements and pushed for things, um, which is good. But at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that the system, that's not what the system is for. That's just the way that we're trying to like influence a system that's not for us. The system is exactly as you said.
Like
to give money, to transfer money from
Yeah,
the general
from the
population
public
to the
to
private wealthy
private
hands.
hands. Like, do you remember like was it 2 years ago? I think it was just when the Ukraine war was starting or something. There was at the same time there was a British footballer who had this campaign to give school kids
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
lunch. Yeah, and it was like such resistance. I don't think it was Conservative government at the time, but it was such resistance to like what to everybody was like, Christ, feed the kids.
Yeah.
Just feed the kids. And then and then there's kind of a talk of kind of let's get like billions of dollars together to give arms to Ukraine, and that went through in a heartbeat. And I was thinking, kids are starving in the UK.
Yeah.
They're starving, and that like because that is public money that's going to go to public hands, and that's not what governments are for.
Yeah.
We are designed to take public money and give it to private hands because when you say you're giving money
Kids
to
don't need
Ukraine, what
it.
you're
BAE
really doing
Systems
is you.
need it.
Sorry, say again.
I said the kids don't need it. BAE Systems need it.
BAE Systems needs it because that money. I don't think people fully understand. Like we're told like when you're giving money to a country, be Ukraine, be whatever, and we're saying we're supporting that country. They're not giving that money to the country. They're giving that money directly to BAE Systems, who are then shipping weapons to
Yeah.
that country. So that is just we're giving money, public money, to private hands, and I just think it's just it's just the entire. I was diving into Doge. We've got to go. We're gonna go here. We're gonna go all the way here. This is the day we're gonna go all the way. I was diving into Doge because I don't like agree with it. I think it's fascinating what's going on in the US. I'm kind of like watching it from afar with neither positive, with neither like pro or con kind of any particular. I'm just fascinated by it. And there's a lot of obviously things going on about Doge and kind of cutting back, which seems it's fascinating to me because if I believe the purpose of government is to take public money to private hands, an attempt to completely shut that down and to cut it off is fascinating to me.
Mm.
And I was diving into it, and it was it was so funny. What do you think the majority of the US budget is spent on?
I would imagine it's spent on either military or healthcare.
Yeah, well, it's welfare.
Right.
It's welfare,
Does that include healthcare?
which
Is that in
that
the
includes
definition?
healthcare. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's welfare includes, and it was like it was fascinating to me because I looked at that and I was like, it was like the US spends um, more per head count on welfare than the UK, and they don't have free.
But they don't have
They
much.
don't have free. They don't have free healthcare, and I don't believe you have a state pension, and you don't believe anything else.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like the ultimate example of like there's all this public money that seemingly is going to all these private institutions, but the output, the impact of it is far less. And to me, that's like I don't know, like I might be getting more and more activist and angry as I'm not angry, but like more and more, I'm just feeling more and more that it's like I'm sitting here, we're talking about Emirates, we're talking about this, we're talking about that, but the problem is the system, and
Mm.
I think
Yeah, I
like
agree.
governments are supposed to be on our side. That's
And
the
I think
story
that's
we've
the
been
myth.
told.
I think that's one of the
That's the
biggest
myth.
myths that we are blinded to because we're told that since the day we're born is like the government is there for the people.
Yeah.
And it's there for some people, but it's not there for all people. And I think as long as we believe that myth, then we're looking at everything else through the back to front lens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, John Maynard Keynes, who is obviously
Sounds familiar.
the
Yeah.
kind of the uh, the the god of modern economic theory. Um,
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you said earlier, like that sort of modern economics is more of a religion than a science, and I think that's true. And he's sort of the deity that is worshipped, and um, But he said that inflation is a means of stealing money from the population. So it means for government to steal vast amounts of money from the
Yeah.
population and use it for whatever they want, and whatever they want, as in like
Yeah.
privately, whatever
Whatever
they
they
want.
want. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I think, like, inflation for me is a fascinating thing because
It
I
is a
see
tax.
it's a tax. It's the
Yeah.
biggest tax on everybody, and it's the
Yeah.
one that most people don't even realize exists because we're told that, like, oh yeah, for inflation, oh yeah, that's just
I
inflation.
wonder why we have this. There was like, oh, we seem to have this inflation. I
Yeah,
wonder why we have it. It's so mysterious. Like, what did we do recently that I can't even imagine what we did recently to have caused inflation? It must be outside of our control. It's kind of this
yeah,
constant story. But
yeah.
yeah,
And I've met very few people in my life, and there are, I've met a few, but very few people who have ever stopped and questioned. Hang on a minute, this inflation thing. What exactly is it? Where does it come from? Why do things get more expensive every year? And and we just take it for granted that that's the way the world works. Things get more expensive every year. And actually, like, things should get cheaper every year because science and technology
holy
advances,
shit.
and
Yeah,
we develop increasing production efficiency. So the
yeah.
cost of everything should be going down, and we're told that that's not true, and that the price of things going down is somehow really bad for the economy. We must never have deflation. That's really bad. We'll all end up in poverty if we have deflation. If things get cheaper, we'll end up poor. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but
That's because of the way GDP is
yeah,
measured.
right.
GDP, like a measure of a country's worth,
Yeah,
is only a measure of the things that can be bought or sold within that
yeah,
country.
yeah,
Nothing
exactly.
else.
But the
Yeah.
truth of inflation is that basically they're creating new money with the banks all of the time,
Yeah.
and they're diluting the money pool. It's literally that. It's like,
Well, because I'm following Stephen Keenan, Steve Keenan, oh, I forget. He's got this. Yes, that does happen, but he's actually his thesis and a number of the theses of the or they call them the heterodox economists. You follow the heterodox economists, but he's got this very compelling argument. And as soon as he presented it, I was like, damn, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Like, because there's a story that we're told that we get inflation because governments print money. And he's not saying that isn't true, but he's saying there's actually a bigger cause of inflation. And that cause of inflation is banks.
hmm.
Because like I never thought of it until he really expressed it. Like when I go to a bank, when I got my mortgage for my home from my bank, the way the way we're taught is that that bank is lending out your savings.
It's not.
It's not. They just make them invent the money. The
Yeah,
money is just
exactly.
invented off the top. And I was like, of course,
Exactly. Yeah.
of course. And
It's the
then
banks and
you
the
go back to
governments
the global.
together are creating new
Yeah,
money. Yeah.
yeah, creating new money. But like, it's interesting because neoclassical economics has that assumption that banks only lend out what they have for savings. That's why they've kind of like gone, well, let's not even bother modeling that because it just nets off to zero.
Mm.
And then you go back to the global financial crisis. And what exactly happened there? Well, hang on. Banks created they had a lot of interdependence and money that was created that was then used to hedge other things, used to hedge other things. So this entire thing that economics kind of like went, don't look there. There's nothing interesting happening with like banks and money. That you should blame the and I just did spend like 5 minutes blaming the government before. You should blame the government. But like I go back to that problem. It's like economics is the problem and governments kind of like for whatever reason promote that myth that there's this thing called economics, that myth that you're actually in charge because you have this thing called voting.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, if you wanted to make a change, all you've got to do is vote, and we'd make a change. But you're not voting for the things you want to happen. So
Yeah.
this is your choice. This is your choice as an individual.
This
That's
is
why this is happening because you wanted it.
yeah, and this is a big part of the myth. And yeah, I think so. So a big myth is, as you were saying, about believing that the purpose of government is to serve the public, whereas actually, in fact, the purpose of the government is to serve an elite few who I'm not even going to claim that I can define who those few are. But but then the economic system is also designed as part of that whole plan. And I'm not going to, it's not even that it's designed by government. I think the whole system is sort of designed as part of like one bigger thing, like the government system, the banking system. They're all actually like they're just like kind of modules of a bigger system. Um, yeah. And the money thing is crazy. I mean, like, I've always thought, like, how come is it that a government who takes in so much money in tax every year. I mean, it's insane. I mean, the British government is like £1 trillion a year or something. Is they bring in tax revenues, and and if you look at your life, there's just tax like flying out everywhere. Like, you buy something, there's 20% VAT, and and you buy a house and there's stamp duty, and then you get paid and you get like income tax and national insurance, and then
Yeah.
somebody dies and you pay inheritance tax, and then the companies, they pay like corporation tax, and there's just tax, 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 tax. They're just taking it everywhere, and then they're always saying they don't have enough money, and they're always just saying they don't have enough money, and I've always thought, like, well, why not? Like, where is it? And then they always say, oh, the national debt's rather big. And I think, hang on a minute. So the, like, who are you in debt to? Like, who did you borrow the money from? And like, and then you look into that and you're like, okay, well, they borrowed a load from the Bank of England, which they claim that they own, but they pay
Yeah.
interest to. But they claim that they're paying interest to the Bank of England doesn't actually affect them because they own the Bank of England. So it's kind of like circular. They're just
You
passing
got
money in a
two
circle.
departments. One department says they own another money to another department,
Right.
and then that's what Steve Keenan is saying. Is like there's this is not it's not what's happening. Is what he
Yeah,
think he doesn't think
exactly.
deficits are real. Yeah,
Yeah. And then
or
the
at least
government
don't.
also,
Yeah,
they also owe like loads of money to private banks and pension funds and all sorts of things. And so
yeah,
why are you borrowing money from them? Like what are you doing? Like,
yeah.
but
So, but it's like when there's food that's needed for school children who are hungry, it's like, oh, the deficit. Oh, we
yeah,
can't do it, the deficit.
deficit.
When there's massive amounts of weapons or something like that needed by a country, it's like, oh, we've got it.
Yeah. It
It's
just
available.
appears
We
out of
always
nowhere.
have it. It just appears out of anywhere. When there's money needed because we need to suddenly bail out banks, it's
That
there.
it appears out
It's
of
just
nowhere.
there
Yeah.
out of nowhere. But then
Yeah.
as soon
I
as we
mean,
need something, it's deficit.
I kind of find it hilarious that Theresa May made such a big deal out of like when of saying like there is no magic money tree, and she kept repeating there is no magic money tree when people were
Yeah.
asking for things to actually like solve real social problems in the country, and people really suffering, and then suddenly like COVID comes along, and they just go to the magic money tree, and and all the money appears, and it's like, hang on, but you've just told us like 10 times that there is no magic money tree, and now you're standing at the magic money tree being showered in money. um
Yeah.
but the thing is that the whole thing, just sort of to close the loop, when they go to the magic money tree, they get free money, and the people close to them, whoever that is, whether it's people in the financial sector or people who are like weapons companies and so on, who are having like huge contracts sent to them, um, they get that new money, so they like massively profit. But the debt of that is the inflation. So when we're like the
Yes.
next year, you're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh, why does everything got more expensive? Why does my money feel like it doesn't go as far? It's because you're paying for the weapons from last year. You're paying for that big contract with, whoever it was, and but we're never told that. And it is
Yeah.
this like literally we're just like constantly we're paying off this debt to these super wealthy
Yeah.
institutions, whether they're banking institutions or corporations or whoever it might be.
And like, because it's just inflation is just another tax on top of every other tax. And like, do you know how? I don't know if you know this, like how billionaires, like how the ultra wealthy don't the main mechanism when you're wealthy. super wealthy, I'm sure you know this actually. The main mechanism when you're wealthy is because if you sell your shares, if you're Elon Musk,
Mm.
which one pays? If you sell your shares in Tesla, you then have to pay tax on your shares.
Yeah.
So they say like, you can't tax people, you can't tax the wealthy because of shares they own because that's just unrealized wealth. Like they haven't, it could go down as well as up. And so what they do is they then get a loan out that's collateral with their wealth. And so then they suddenly have a whole pile of cash that they didn't pay tax on
Yeah.
that they can then spend. And that's how they buy stuff. That's basically your goal is to become rich in assets, and then you borrow off those assets to buy other assets, and then that's basically how the rich get. And then there's this kind of like way of it's like most people don't know that there's like
Yeah.
a level of society where you get to where you're like, oh, I've been told this story. You get a job, you do this, you earn this much money, you pay taxes, you get a pension,
It's
you
linear.
retire, blah blah blah. That's what your life is. Then you learn actually no, there's this other story that the ultra rich have just been using for ages, and like it's well known that like if you're a corporate company, the return on investment is 10 times higher for lobbying versus R&D.
That's insane.
10 times higher. 10 times higher. So you get 10 times more return on investment by having a lobbyist work with governments to you know loosen up rules and regulations or get some of that
Public money
public
in.
money, get some of that public money into your pot than actually doing any kind of meaningful research.
That's
You could
crazy.
argue perhaps like benefit society more as like R&D versus that. Is there's just like this way the world works that is just like I know, and then I go back to my first principle. The only purpose of government is to take public money and give it to private hands. As soon as I absorb that, I just can't see. I see everything from that light.
Mm.
I see everything from that light, and it perfectly explains all of it.
Yeah.
It perfectly explains which wars we're involved with. We're involved with the wars where if we give money to this side, that money's going to go to our weapons manufacturers. That
Yeah.
is the linkage between all the wars that we have. We would
Well,
never
as well as
support
we're
the
involved
side. Yeah,
in wars that
yeah.
are going to support other like powerful corporations. So, for example, like fossil fuel companies, we're
Mm,
going to be involved in
yes.
wars that help control territories that they can
Our
profit from.
fossil fuel,
Yeah,
our fossil fuel
exactly.
companies, not yeah, yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And similarly with like the companies that do the reconstruction and so on. I mean, they tend to. Well, yeah, I mean, there's British companies that are involved in that as well. So, but yeah. So,
Well, got off my chest at least.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. I mean, I think
yeah.
I'm glad. No, I'm glad you said it because I think it's really helpful to. We got to have these things on the table because if we don't, we're all just basically just talking out of what? Like it doesn't really mean anything if you're talking about like trying to solve real problems and trying to like people say, oh, we need system change, but then it's like, but what is the system? You're like, if you think the system is that we have democracy, which is there for the people, it's not quite working and we need to tweak it around the edges, then
Yeah.
that's not the same thing as like what we actually have, which is a system that was never here for us in the first place. And it is there to basically just kind of appease us enough that we keep working and not creating a fuss and keep transferring wealth into private hands is a very different thing.
And it goes back to your point. It almost feels like a pointless strategy to actually lay blame. Yeah, I'm going back to your point. It almost feels like a pointless strategy to lay blame at the feet of corporations because it's just they're part of this system that we've just been talking about,
Yeah.
and that's the game that's being played. And we somehow expect, whether or not we think they should be doing it, just as a chess move, it's just not a good chess move because it's going against the headwind of all of this.
Yeah.
Um, And the solution that we're going to have for all of our problems is not going to come from every organization on this planet finding the, the ability in the spine to kind of make decisions that go against that flow. It's just not gonna, as a chess move,
Yeah,
it's not gonna
because
get
they're
us to
still within
checkmate.
that
Yeah,
same flow.
yeah.
Yeah. So the wicked question is, how do you change the flow? And on some level, I feel like you need to understand the source of this, like the spring. Right? Where is it flowing from? And that it's
Yeah.
so well hidden. I mean, I've been down so many rabbit holes, and you end up like in all these places, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's the Illuminati," and like
Yeah,
and
the
yeah,
lizards.
maybe.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe it is, but even if it is, I don't know who they are or where they are, or like so it doesn't help me.
yeah.
Um, and even if I knew, what would I do with that information? I don't know. So it is a really wicked
Well,
problem.
do you? Maybe it's time for us. I mean, if you've got time, if you've made time to go into an upper chakra
Yeah,
conversation.
let's.
Yeah. So you really sent me down, like you really sent me down a real rabbit hole last week after your whole experience at the Monroe Institute, and um, yeah, I was like really like thinking through, what like what is consciousness? And I've thought about, obviously I've thought about consciousness before, like a lot. And one thing I was thinking about was, is consciousness, I had this epiphany, which was, is consciousness something, this is such a flip of conversation. People are going, is consciousness something that is emergent? I don't know if that's the right way. Is
Yeah, I know
emergent
what you mean.
or
Yeah,
divergent, which was a slightly different way of thinking about it. Because for me, historically, I just think it's interesting. I, I, I think about things like the Earth consciousness and this and that and the other, but it's almost like I've been thinking about it for ages as like I'm conscious and then you're conscious, and then maybe together our consciousnesses merge and get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But then I was thinking, like, what if it was the opposite way around? What if there is, what if the Earth is conscious, and then we are buddings off of that consciousness? So I flipped the hierarchy upside down, and I was like, oh, that's brilliant. That's really good. I like that. Because it kind of like mapped to my like concentration and dilution of power. It's like this other way of like I'm important, and then if there's more of me, then it's kind of that hierarchy of going up of authority. There's like a higher authority of consciousness. I don't know. It just
Mm.
felt it was more like that. Whereas the other idea, which was like we're just like buddings off of the earth consciousness, and the bacteria in my stomach are like buddings off of my consciousness. Then when I was like diving into it, I went into just the whole, the Essentia Foundation. Have you seen their videos
Oh, they got
online?
some interesting stuff
Really
going
good
on there.
stuff.
Yeah.
They had a course on analytic idealism, which I kind of have been devouring. Have you done into that one?
No, I
Oh,
haven't done
no,
it.
then
No.
it's really, really good. And it was basically the same thing. It was like, done in much more intelligent ways than I've just done, because these are actual scientists who've, multidisciplinary. And they had basically the same idea, which is analytic idealism is what if there is one consciousness in the universe? There's only one, and um, the way he presented it was very interesting. Like if we treat consciousness not as an epiphenomenon, not as like a thing that happens when you have neurons in a brain, it's like a fundamental it's a fundamental aspect of the universe. Then maybe you can take diseases of consciousness, like human mental conscious diseases, and then apply that to a larger scale, which was interesting. So, for instance,
Mm.
DID, it's a new term for multiple personality disorder. So, when people in one body have two completely different personalities, and they are two completely different personalities with two completely different sets of memories. They have two completely
Yeah.
different like ideas. And so his idea was what the idea has been presented is that that's basically what's going on in the universe, is that there's this one consciousness, and then we are basically like divergent, but the same way as a human brain might kind of have multiple personalities. Then can you apply that to that? And then it was like, yes, what if you, well, if you could, then this is what would happen is you'd have like buddings off of consciousnesses off from the main consciousness. And then they were talking about, well, it's a really interesting series, but it was talking about, well, can we look at some science behind like what happens? Is there a shared aspect of you and me? And then they looked at there's a fascinating study on people with multiple personality disorder and their dreams.
Okay.
And so they analyzed, and it was like, it's so interesting. So people who have multiple personality disorders, I might have like three people in my head who are different
Yeah.
people at different times. When each of those personalities separately dreams, they would actually end up having the same dream, but there would be different characters in the dream. And like one
Okay.
dream would come
Yeah.
back and go, "Oh, I saw somebody punching somebody on the face on the ground." The other person would come back was, "I was on the ground having my face punched, and someone was watching me." And then goes, "I was punching somebody on the ground, and another person was watching." So like, it's like you're. So that kind of implies that it kind of the way he was presenting it is it implies that there's almost a hierarchy upwards of
Mm.
consciousness, and so when you dream, you're actually going into the higher sense. When you sleep, you're going into that higher sense, and there's a higher sense, and there's a higher sense. And then, like, the earth maybe is conscious, and then maybe the Milky Way is conscious, and then maybe the universe is conscious, and they're all just buddings off in between. And it kind
Yeah.
of really mapped to kind of what you were saying about when you said that you can, it's like a river, it's like an ocean that you can cross. You think there's separateness, but you can cross. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
If you
don't know.
follow the seabed,
Yeah,
the
follow the
the land
seabed.
all joins.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that
No,
was a
that's very much kind of what I'm feeling is something similar to that in the sense that um like what you're talking about, like the emergent consciousness, the sort of the mainstream view of like material
yeah,
science
like
in this age.
panpsychism. Oh, emergent consciousness, like where it's
Emergent
a
consciousness is
phenomenon of
basically
your
that
brain.
somehow,
Yeah.
if you get like the right conditions, the right combination of material things,
Mm.
like atoms and molecules, you get them just in the right combination with the right kind of energy, somehow
Yeah.
consciousness emerges from
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
that's what happened in like the evolution is basically that like or somehow on earth there were just these perfect conditions that some sort of basic life emerged
Yeah.
and then it sort of kept growing and growing until we appeared. um and I think it's something much closer to the opposite, that there is a there is some sort of, I mean, like this is we've mentioned Federico Fagin before, the Italian scientist, and he like he talks about there just basically being like everything is consciousness. There's a sea of consciousness, and then and he doesn't claim to know what that is,
Mm. Mm.
right?
Mm.
Or where that's from, or where
Yeah.
it lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but from that, like emerge these sort of like these peaks of
Excitation of like, yeah.
excitation,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that are like you and me and the earth, and some of them are bigger than others, and then they have, it's because it's fractal, right? So there's like you get some big things emerge, and off the big things appear some medium things, off them appear some small things, and off them some tiny things, and so on and so on. And so you've got like the universe, and then galaxies, and then solar systems, and then planets, and then beings like us, and then the bacteria in our guts, and
Yeah.
it just goes down and down and down. But ultimately it didn't start from some tiny cells somehow becoming conscious. It actually started from a big sea of consciousness and actually kind of like layered
Yeah.
downwards,
Downwards.
and we're
Yeah.
somewhere down near the bottom at like the most dense level.
And
Um,
maybe we might not be the leaves of the tree. Like we literally might like I took my bacteria in my stomach might be. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'm being too literal with the with the hierarchy. Maybe my bacteria is a whole different type of consciousness. It's not a part of mine. But but yeah,
who knows?
and it also because you were talking about near death experiences as well. But just want to let you know, it actually didn't click that a near death experience until I watched this thing. A near death experience was actually the most perfect evidence for consciousness not being a material phenomenon. If you
Yeah,
believe, I know it just never clicked. It was just like, oh, that's a
yeah, yeah,
nice idea thing. It's never clicked that, like, if you're saying that consciousness is a function of your brain function, when your brain function goes away, you shouldn't be conscious. So
exactly.
if you have a near death experience, it is basically it's the evidence that's really hard for people just to ignore. It's like, well, it's right
Mm.
there in front of you. The clue that this isn't what you think it is. That consciousness is something more than just a bunch of chemicals in your brain. Yeah,
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 I think the other clue, which ties in nicely with that, and which everybody can experience, is the fact that the only thing any human can know for sure is that they are conscious. I can't be sure that you exist. I can't be sure that this microphone exists, but I can be sure that I'm conscious. And
yeah,
so the only truth that I can ever hold on to is that consciousness exists. And
yeah.
then what we do is we try and figure out how does consciousness emerge from all these material things? It's like, but why would I try to prove it emerges from these things that I'm not sure exist, rather than starting from what I know is a truth, which is that consciousness
Is
does exist, and somehow, like, it doesn't mean that the material things don't exist as well. It's just that that's a less certain truth than
and
that consciousness exists.
yeah, and it's not only that consciousness exists. It's like we also have this kind of perception of the universe. Like like what do I really know about this microphone in front of me? Like I don't really know. Um, I can see it, but I can only see it from like the electromagnetic spectrum that I can see. Like this really could just be an abstract construct, which my consciousness believes is a microphone, and therefore I'm speaking into it, and I believe that it's kind of like passing electrical signal through this wire, but is it?
That is it. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have people who have things like near death experiences or psychedelic experiences or some sort of spiritual
Yeah.
experience where they experience something that is tangibly physical that
Yeah.
by all of our conventional understanding doesn't exist. And then that creates and also some people, I mean, I've never had this, but some people talk about having experiences where it was not just tangibly physical, it was tangibly more real. There's this concept of like realness, like we
Mm.
somehow as humans we have a sense of what is real and what's not, and that's how we discern,
Yeah.
for example, like that dream states, like although that was just a dream and that this is real life,
Yeah.
and we differentiate between the two. But then you get people who sometimes have an experience and they were like, that was more real than my daily waking life. So then like how do I then know that this microphone is real? Because I've been somewhere else
That
where
feels
things were
more
more
real.
real than this room, you know?
God, this is such a weird place to go. You can get so lost down here. But but it also like it also because all we're really doing is perceiving the world around us, and all that we're doing is perceiving the world around us with a very limited set of senses. Like the material world is stuff that has things that you can measure about it. And
Hmm.
despite that fact, we can only measure a tiny fraction of what is actually
And
happening
more
out in the material world.
specifically,
Yeah. Yeah.
things that you can measure with with
With
material
material
tools.
things. Yeah. By a consciousness.
Yeah.
By a consciousness. and just how it like it's just so fascinating because it's all linking in. Like it's quantum, like the whole idea of entanglement and I think it's fascinating how all of these things are kind of coming in together because you can't kind of ignore them anymore.
Yeah.
All these different like consciousness is linked to quantum, which is linked to physics, which is linked to which is linked to our belief about what the material world is,
Yeah.
and and then, but it's still something that a society we don't really treat as a first. It's almost insulting how we treat our consciousness these days. It's like this accidental thing, and you
Yeah.
shouldn't really like treat it anything special. It's just
Yeah. Whereas actually, it's like the most special
the
thing in
most special
existence,
thing.
really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if that's true, like it does. Like, can you? Is we'll go crazy. Like I do. Like I've got friends who deeply believe in manifestation. Like deeply believe that you can actually manifest parts of your reality. Um, and if the consciousness, because that's the whole thing with quantum computing is and not quantum computing, but well, yeah, maybe quantum computing, but like we could be just creating this world and this environment around us because all the material, all that matter is really is an excitation of a quantum. It's not even a real, like once you get to the quantum level, it's
Well,
not
if you zoom
even,
in far enough,
yeah,
like even mainstream physics says, if you zoom in far enough, none
yeah,
of it really exists.
none of it really exists. Like an, like an, like a subatomic particle is just like a ripple on a quantum field, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so huh? I can touch this. I can move it around. I can like, but it's just, but it's not even there. It's just an excitation of some,
It's just an idea
it's
that
just
the
an,
universe had.
it's just an idea. It's like, you're like, what is going on? And then like, if maybe if I manifested it strongly enough, like this microphone would become a banana. Like if I believed in it like strongly enough, like maybe it wouldn't it's collapsing right now as a Rode microphone. But maybe it could
Well,
collapse into like a banana.
well, this
Yeah.
is one of the things that crazy. If we're going down this route, um,
I think about it a lot. Yeah.
yeah, but it's one of the things like if you look back in time at like things that don't make any sense, that some people who are they're considered crazy in today's world because we don't know how to turn microphones into bananas with our minds, right?
Yeah.
Um, but if you look at like the talking about the Indian yugas again, for
Yeah.
example, about they have these different like great ages, and humanity is in a very different state in each age, and we're supposedly in the Kali Yuga, which is like the lowest and densest and least connected to like higher
Oh,
consciousness.
really?
Um, yeah, and that
Yeah.
and as you go back up at the top end of the scale, you've like people have these sort of like magical powers, or things that we would consider magical powers, and and then you look back at things like the pyramids and so on, and
I'm
it's like,
going
well,
there.
we just don't know how they were built. I know you want to go here, but that we don't know how they were built. But nearly every explanation we try to come up with is trying to come at it from our current perception of reality and our current like understanding of like human abilities. And
Yeah.
our current understanding is like everything's completely material. You want to like shape and move stone, you gotta like get
Yeah.
like big
A
things
harder thing
and
and
like
smash it to a
hard
softer thing.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And maybe there are other ways that we just don't understand, but that we just lost. Like those abilities have atrophied over how I don't know if it's
Well,
at what time
it,
period we're even talking about, but
Well, because I've thought about this a lot actually. I thought because people talk about it sometimes like a
yeah,
lost technology, but maybe it's not a lost technology, but the ether, the age of humans, however that is kind of manifested, has changed to a point where we just don't have access to those capabilities and capacities anymore. Like there's this vibrational theory around how the pyramids were shaped and made and how the blocks were cut. And then people talk, oh, we've lost some technology, but also there's no evidence. I will take it. There's no evidence of that kind of technology
Mm.
landing here. And I don't know if I think that is evidence that the technology never existed, because over tens of thousands of years, you're going to lose a lot of stuff. But it could all just fundamentally be that the technology is so different to what we would today consider technology that we wouldn't even recognize it. It could just be
Yeah.
like a thought, or if it's vibrational technology, it could just be very low key, low wooden instruments or something like that, just create the right vibration or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that it sounds crazy to even hypothesize such things, but like we don't know. And we have this idea that like, well, they must have been made by either really primitive people with brute force, which just doesn't stack up
Doesn't
when you
make
look at like
sense.
the scale and the
Yeah.
accuracy.
Does
Um,
not stack up at all. Yeah.
it's like we couldn't do it now,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that doesn't stack up to me.
Yeah.
But then you go the other way and like, well, what if they were like super advanced? Our idea of super advanced means they've got like massive manufacturing plants with like laser cutting, computer control, and it's like, well, that's because that's how we think, because that's how we do things. But what if they had ways of doing things that we just can't even imagine, because their whole culture was completely different, and maybe they lived in a time when humans did have some sort of different abilities. I don't even want to say what they might be, but yeah, like
Like if that whole idea, that whole thesis around that there's a global consciousness and we're budding off in between, there are, like, we are aware when I think even in the spiritual practices today, you are aware when, I would say I'm very aware from when I'm more in connection with, we're talking about the higher self. My higher self would be
yeah,
perhaps be the next level up in that budding off of consciousness. Is
yeah.
I'm aware of this thing, but maybe they were more aware of it and more attuned to it,
Mm.
and that knowledge gave them the ability to turn microphones into bananas. I don't know, but like,
But
yeah,
maybe it is exactly that. That maybe because like we have the ability to create. Like last night, I was at this like amazing party at this crazy like hotel in the city with like amazing stonework, and oh, it was great. And then I woke up and I was like, oh, like that wasn't real.
oh, is it
But
true?
but
Yeah,
that exists somewhere as an idea that is almost, not quite, but almost as real as this. And
yeah,
and if we were even like just a little bit like more connected than we are now, then you'd say, well, it's not. Well, I mean, people who are like really good at lucid dreaming, for example, can like make things happen in their dream states, and so effectively what they're doing is they're in another world,
yeah,
and they're able to manipulate that world in a way that we can't manipulate this physical world, and make things happen with them with their minds, literally.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but if there is this like pairing off of consciousness as we go down through the layers, and
yeah.
dreaming is just like it's the layer just
Just
above
above, yeah,
where we
yeah,
are,
yeah,
then what's to say that in some previous time they didn't have some way of kind of that? Well, maybe the boundaries were more blurred,
yeah,
because if this is all emergent from consciousness, then like the pyramids then are also just an idea that the universe had, right? The physicality of them
yeah,
is a red herring.
yeah,
Um, so it sounds a bit crazy, but if you could imagine them in a dream, you could sort of engineer them in a dream. Like Tesla, for example. I mean, I read a book that he wrote. I don't know whether it's the only one he wrote, but
yeah,
I read a book he wrote, and he's literally talking about how he prototypes machines in his head. He doesn't build them
yeah,
until he's basically sure that he's nailed it, and so he keeps iterating and iterating and iterating until he gets to the point where he's like, "Aha, I've cracked it. I've optimized this machine."
yeah,
And then he goes and tries to get all the materials and tries to build it and make it, see if it works. And I just like the way he was describing it. I was like, this is on another level. Like I can't comprehend how he's literally like prototyping like some sort of complex engine in his head. And if you lived in a time where there were
mm,
more humans like that, and that somehow, like, if he can prototype that in his head, then basically there's a parallel reality in his mind where that machine exists, where all the physics is kind of the same as this realm, and it's a kind of a small leap once you say, well, actually everything is just a consciousness and physicality is also just consciousness. It's a small leap to say, well, if you
Yeah.
can prototype it in your mind, you could somehow birth it
Birth it into real
into
life.
the physical realm.
Well, it's interesting because when you listen to talk to people who are more in the creative realms, like musicians, like there was a, I think it's Cole. I'm not very good at music. I think it's Coldplay, and there's a song that's like, da, 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 da. You have no idea what I'm talking about. Anyway, I think it's him, and I was watching him being interviewed about how that song came along, and he just said something. It's always stuck with me. He said something really interesting. He goes, "That song came to me from wherever songs come from." So he's like, there's a song, it exists somewhere in the world, in the universe, and it just, because I can imagine, I've seen like musicians when they're in their moment, it's just like,
Hmm.
it's not like, and even when you're engineering, when you're coming with an engineer, it's like sometimes it doesn't feel like I'm coming up with it. It feels like I'm being given it. I'm being
Yeah.
given, downloaded this thing into me. And so if they can just kind of like create stuff, if they can think that like this song came from somewhere else and you created it, like you can create like I had this theory like let's say what would it really look like? I was trying to think like what would it really look like if I manifested? If I manifested, like what would that really look like? If I manifested, if I said to you right now, Tom, I'm gonna manifest an elephant in this room. I'm going to manifest an elephant in this room. It wouldn't happen, I think, by an elephant just appearing in this room. I think it would happen by temporarily me changing my life so that all the conditions that would make an elephant appear in my room, it would just appear in my room. And so an elephant would be here, and you would say, "Well, of course the elephant is in the room. I saw you brought it in. In fact, you adopted that elephant when you were like 10 years old, and you've been looking after it. His name's Ellie. I've seen that elephant 5 times. What are you mad?" And I'm like, "No, no, I manifested it, Tom." So like that's how it would that's kind of like what the when people say you have to manifest your future.
Hmm.
And people go, well, actually, all that you're doing is you're making that future happen by doing all the things to make that future happen. But it's kind of
Yeah.
like that's how man. I think that's how manifest. I think that's how like that's how that's how it would happen. It would be like you would manifesting would manifest not just the thing, but all the conditions that made that thing happen. Would does that make sense? What I'm saying?
It does,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a couple of theories of manifestation that I came across recently
Yeah.
that sort of relate to that I found really interesting. One is sort of that in the sense that basically what you're doing in trying to manifest something is that you are sending a signal into this like bigger field of consciousness that basically is like sort of like a message going out that like this thing should happen, and that's happening all over the place. All these little points of consciousness, the humans, the animals, the bacteria in our guts, whatever, they've all got their own little signals going
Ah,
out, and
yeah.
that the strength of the signals is like a probability field that sort of
Right.
dictates what actually ends up happening, and that you're not like when you're trying to manifest an elephant. It's not like, oh, if I think hard enough, a physical full size elephant will magically appear in my room. It
Yeah.
it's more that you're you're dedicating yourself to trying to like send a clearer and stronger signal into the field, which then dictates certain probabilities about the future. And it might be that one day one of your kids comes home and they just like carry a toy elephant into that room, and you're like, where did you get that from? And like, oh, I won it at the fair, and you're like, oh, but I've been trying to manifest an elephant to like be in this room, and that might be how it comes about, and it doesn't happen exactly the way, like it wasn't literally like a physical
Yeah.
like live elephant came to the room, but so that's one
But if you
theory.
believe in it, it's kind of like the way. it's like you can't want it, because wanting
Mm.
something means you haven't got it. You have to kind of like just know. Like, I know I have an elephant. I know there's an elephant right there behind me right now. And if you can like truly in your heart just like really, that's why the purest of the signal of it is like you really have to like almost convince yourself that there really is an elephant sitting behind me.
Yeah.
Um,
No, yeah, that makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. The other theory that I've heard, which I don't, it's not mutually exclusive. Like it could be that both have some truth. The other theory I've heard is that on some level the future is sort of preordained, but in a kind of loose sense, because we still it's like a mixture of fate and free will. That there's sort of most things that are going to happen are probably going to happen, but then we have some like wiggle room to kind of navigate through it in the kind of the flow of life. Um, and that when we're trying to sometimes when we're trying to manifest something, what it is that actually on some subconscious level we kind of already know where the river is going to flow to,
right.
and then we get a sense of it, and somehow we're drawn to that and we try and sort of lean into it, and then we're like, oh, you know what, like I knew I was going to end up here. And maybe you did know you were going to end up here, just
Yeah.
subconsciously rather than consciously. But I don't think those two things necessarily are mutually exclusive. But I've had things, I mean, like, just to give you one example, when when Vanita and I started whole grain digital, we there were a few clients that I had in my mind that I really like. Will sort of my definition of success. That we'll have succeeded when we like get these
Get
clients, and
these
I
clients, yeah.
somehow believed that like we would one day
Yeah.
get these clients.
Yeah.
It was Ecover, the like cleaning products. It was Solar Century, who were at the time were the biggest solar company in the UK,
Yeah.
and Marks and Spencers, because at the time they had their Plan A, which was like really kind of radical at the time. Their sort of sustainability plan, and 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 we never did really anything to try and like attract those clients. And we're like a tiny, tiny business. We never went out networking or trying to like, make contacts with people from those companies. And it took years and years and years. And then over time, like at one point, like we just got this email from somebody at Ecover, and I thought it was spam because I that can't be real. Luckily, Vanita's wiser than me, and she's like, no, 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 I'm going to take it seriously and
Yeah.
follow it
Yeah.
up. And they
Yeah.
became like a really amazing long-term client of ours. And
Nice.
then one day we got an email from somebody at Solar Century,
Yeah.
similar thing. And
Yeah.
then one day we got an email from somebody at Marks and Spencers, and again I was like, oh, that must be spam. That can't be real, because it was Marks-and-Spencer.com. I was like, they can afford like M&S.com. Don't give me that. Like,
Yeah.
but Vanita followed it up, and
Yeah.
they became a long-term client of ours.
Yeah.
And honestly, like to this day, I'm baffled. Like that doesn't make any sense in a rational world. Like the probability of them just coming along and to a tiny little company like ours and wanting, to hire us to do projects for them just seems sort of like weirdly implausible. But then to other people, the idea that somehow it was like, either that I sort of willed it into sent the signal into the universe that attracted them to us, or that it was always going to happen and I just kind of somehow like saw the future, is probably even more implausible to a lot of people.
But would you say you're good at kind of like imagining, like dreaming? Like, do you enjoy just sitting there and like dreaming
Yeah,
of things? Yeah. And
yeah,
like, yeah. So you must have like many, many times you must have like just had a casual dream of
yeah,
not a sleep dream, but like a waking, like, oh, that'll be fantasy,
yeah.
whatever you
The
want to call it.
daydreaming. Yeah, yeah.
Daydreaming, yeah.
Fantasy. Yeah,
Wouldn't it be cool if
yeah.
like Acover was like you imagine it on the logo on your homepage, you would just like casually
Yeah,
imagine it and then be like,
exactly,
yeah,
things like
yeah,
that. Because
yeah.
I've never been one of these people who sits down. I've got my manifestation chart, and I'm like, there's the Ferrari on it, and like the beach house in Marbella, and and and
Yeah,
I'm like willing it every day. I like sit down for
yeah,
20
yeah,
minutes and
yeah,
like will.
yeah,
I've never done any of that, but there have been like a bunch of stuff, and this is like kind of just the easiest one to give as an example. But there's been a bunch of stuff in my life where had those things where I sort of really want them and believe that they will happen in the future. And I've sort of, yeah, like you say, just sort of had them in my mind, daydreaming about them over a
Yeah,
period of time. And then one day something happens and I'm like, wait, like what? How did that, how did that happen?
yeah. And I can see the argument. I can see the argument that like maybe you subtly kind of like nudged things here and there until eventually kind of things landed. Or, I don't know, but like, but yeah, I also believe that because there've been times in my life as well, nothing quite as clear as what you've got there, that I'm like, I, I wanted that and I got it.
Mm.
Yeah. I really like it wasn't just I want it. It wasn't just like I want a Ferrari. For me, it's always been it's almost like a fantasy dream. It's like
Yeah.
hard to. It's like a really and you're living that life. You're living that dream. You're not just like, oh, wouldn't it be cool? It's like you're there. You're at that moment, and then
Yeah.
it kind of just happens. Have you read that? There's a Napoleon Hill book called Think and Grow Rich. Have you heard about that one or read about that one? Have you heard about
No.
very materialistic take on materialism? But it was like just to give a TLDR because it's a long book with a very short summary. He's like, it's like 100 years old or something, and he interviewed like all the oligarchs of the time, and kind of like, what is your secret? What is your secret? What is your secret? And the TLDR of the book is like they all just do this kind of manifestation exercises, which was like every day writing down. I don't know if it's all BS and he just had this manifestation, he pretended it all, but it seems weird. But anyway, you just write down in your journal every single day the thing that it is. You decide what it is that you want, and you write it every single day in your journal, and you do that
Mm.
every single day, and then you get it. And there's also you also you also weren't allowed to masturbate, which was another part of the whole exercise. I
That's
won't
because
tell you.
you lose your power.
You lose your power. I won't tell you which part of those two I failed at. But like yeah, you just write that down and it's kind of like this pure kind of manifestation um exercise, which is mostly just about getting vast amounts of wealth, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It is interesting though. It's yeah, it's almost well, it goes going back to that sort of Nikola Tesla like
Yeah.
prototyping in his head thing. In a way, I feel like it's a similar sort of thing that you've got an idea in your head of what you want to happen in the world, and then you keep imagining it and believing that that's a real thing, and then one day it
It
kind of shows
becomes
up, and it might not
real.
show up exactly as you'd imagined it, but it somehow it does feel as if you've sort of
You're creating it. Yeah.
you've created a
Yeah.
part of reality.
I
Yeah.
do feel that sometimes. I have this thing called like fake it. Well, you don't fake it till you make it. So a lot of the time you fake it, and then at one point you look around and go, actually, hang on, everything that you were dreaming actually has happened, and it's here. But at the same time, part of you is like, well, maybe you just made it happen rather than it just manifested. But I don't know. It's like really,
But then that goes back to the other theory, right? About you kind of saw the future. There's still something weird
oh,
about that you sort of that was the thing that you wanted to happen, and then it did. Like maybe you could say, or maybe there's some rational explanation for it happening, but then why was that the thing that you really wanted to happen? That still opens up kind of mysteries.
and it links in so much to the conversation we were having just before the call started about placebos and nocebos. Because
Mm.
I find that whole topic just so unbelievably fascinating. Because I remember it was kind of the moment I realized, because we're just kind of like, it's almost like a spell that was put on me. The spell that was put on me that like a placebo is somehow bad. It's like, oh, that's just
Hmm.
the placebo effect. Oh God, that's just the placebo effect. You definitely don't want the placebo effect. You want the drug.
Yeah, yeah.
You want the drug. You don't want the
You
placebo
really
effect.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of just this unbelievable realization one day, which was like, hang on, what the F is the placebo effect? How come my brain, if I'm convinced, if I'm sure I was given a pill that does X, it's actually unbelievably hard for pharmaceutical companies to prove that their pill is better than my brain thinking
Yeah.
I've taken a pill.
Yeah.
And
It's
that
crazy.
is it's almost like that is the most compelling evidence I have for like
Yeah.
manifestation is that because I actually fully I believe it so much these days that I believe that I can when I'm ill I just don't I just ignore I'm not ill.
Yeah.
I'm not ill and then I'm not ill. When I'm times I do get ill is kind of like me kind of like because that's the nocebo, isn't it? The nocebo is you taught me nocebo today, which is like you can believe that you're ill
Yeah.
and you become
And
ill.
then you actually become ill,
Yeah.
or you're or worsen the illness that you already got.
Worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's just
Yeah.
it's if the world knew it's almost like medic it's almost like the the it's okay if there's a charlatan medical it's okay that there's somebody who's not really um giving you like a real drug as long as you believe enough. So it
Yeah.
goes back to
Exactly.
all the
Yeah.
all the what do you call them all the religious oh, faith healers. It
Mm.
almost if placebo is true, then it's true, but only if you believe it true,
That's it. Yeah.
which goes to
It's this weird
magic. Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
It is magic,
yeah,
and people it's really mocked in our cultures. Like, oh, that's just not nonsense because that's just the placebo effect. It's like
yeah,
never put the word "just" before the placebo effect. You know, the fact it's one of the most well-established
yeah,
like things in medicine, like
yeah,
scientifically established, and the fact that all like drug trial regulations require you to have a placebo-controlled trial is because it's so well proven that
yeah,
this is a very powerful real phenomenon.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, Vanessa and I were toying with the idea a couple of years ago. You never know; it might happen one day. Maybe, maybe I'll manifest it of starting a placebo company. You know, you basically sell like I don't know what they would be, but you sell these tablets that are probably just full of like some nice herb or something. But you don't claim that the herb doesn't really matter what it is. It's just nothing bad for you. And you sort of you have some doctor who basically, I mean, I think you struggle with regulations here, but
Yeah,
you just need a doctor to basically be your front man and
yeah,
say, like, these will help you. You know, these will help you feel better. And I'm a doctor, so it is true. And of course that a doctor, regulated doctor, can't say that, but if they
yeah,
could,
yeah,
you know, like if you went to your GP and because it's even proven that even if a doctor tells you that it's a placebo, it
yeah.
still has the placebo effect, which is insane. So you could go
What?
to your
So if a
doctor. Yeah.
doctor tells you, wait, that it's a placebo, just because a medical person is telling you, that doesn't even make any
Yeah,
sense. Yeah,
I know, right?
yeah,
So this is the thing, and I'm sure there's probably some statistical difference in like a blind placebo compared to a non-blind placebo. There probably is like a benefit to it being blind, but still, it's like a thing. So to me, it's like, you know, when I go to my GP and the first thing they should say is like, well, would you like a placebo? I think it'll make you feel better. And I'd say, oh yeah,
Oh
I
God,
love one of
yeah,
them.
yeah,
I really want to
yeah,
feel better. Thank
yeah,
you. And then I'd
yeah,
go home and there's like, if you don't feel better in 3 days, come back. Like, try the placebos for 3 days.
yeah. And and also, but like y- you can be. It's almost like a whole medical industry is. I do believe that people feel ill because there's a certain amount of clarity it gives your life when you're told you're ill. I don't know
Yeah.
how to explain that.
Like
It's a
certainty.
certainty, and you've got this like person out there who's going right. The reason you're feeling shit is not because of the advertising. It's because you have a slight imbalance in X, Y, and Z, and da, 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 da. And you're like, brilliant. Oh, I've been wondering what's wrong with me.
Mm.
Oh, that's what's wrong with me. Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. And so there's like this, and I and just and God, what if everything's like that? I don't know. Like, what if all of it, like, like those, and the donut economics is fascinating. The donut economics. I don't know if is this connected. It's connected in my head for some reason. But there's this equation called the Black-Scholes equation.
Okay,
Is
what's
it
that?
when you're trading like options on the stock market? Option is like it's a derivative product, so it's like I will buy that share at that time for this price, and if it's like a bet almost, right?
Yeah,
Um, so those are being traded, but like what price do you sell them at? This share, and what should I sell it at if the strike price is June versus July versus September? Like how should the price change? How should the price change
yeah,
if the price is different? And so the Black-Scholes equation came along, and it was like, well, this is actually, given these parameters, given the stock price, given this is how you should actually, this is what the price of that option should be. And they won a Nobel Prize because their equation predicted the stock price to predicted the actual prices by as close as 2%. So there was like, you perfectly come up with this equation that perfectly modeled the world. Well done. Thank you so much for that. Then some Dutch researchers, kind of a year or two later, went back in time and go, do you know what? We're actually just going to interview the traders who are selling these shares, selling these options, and going, hey, look, what did you used to sell it at? And they go, well, actually, we used to sell it at like, it was almost like 20-40% before the price differences between the Black-Scholes. So why did you start selling it at that price? Well, this equation came out. And so we've kind of gone like, you've got a Nobel Prize for predicting the market, but actually the market just followed
the market followed the prediction.
prediction. And so like we're being told like all these things about the universe. We've been told, inflation is this, and governments are this,
Yeah.
and medicine is this, and companies are this, but it's all just, I don't know. It's all
It's this
just,
thing about like if you
yeah,
control the narrative, like the mainstream thought,
yeah.
then you kind of control the future. And
And
it's
if
in my
thought
head, it's always like
controls
yeah,
consciousness,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly that consciousness controls thought, and thought controls behavior,
yeah,
and behavior shapes the world. So if you can't control like necessarily. Well, maybe you can control some layer of consciousness. You can't probably control like
yeah.
literally control like the root of consciousness, but the higher you can get on that scale, the more influence you have. And I always wonder about Terminator, like, with what's going on now with AI and the robots and so on. And I always look at it and I think, did Terminator predict the future with like, neural net AI and these like humanoid robots? Or did or have these tech
Or did we invent that?
people just built what they saw in movies when they were younger? Because that's the thing that was in their heads.
Yeah. One of the ways I have thought about that a lot actually. Like one of the ways that we can maybe all we need to do is I think we need to change. I don't know what a solution is here, but I think it's linked to consciousness. Everything I spoke at the first part of this podcast, I think is linked to consciousness. I think the solution is linked to consciousness. I think the solution is linked to people changing their minds, and more than just about how the world works, but just fundamentally like changing their minds, like changing this agreed upon reality that 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 we live in. And it's almost like I almost see it as like the only solution to this problem that we're in right now, because I I given the forces that are at play, I don't see any. I really struggle to see like how we're actually going to make those kind of changes, other than what's within our power is what's within our minds, what's with our own consciousness. If we like treat that as a
Yeah.
first class citizen, then maybe there's a solution which changes all of that. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And tying that back to what you said about whether it's true or not, Napoleon Hill saying that
Yeah.
like all of these elite people, that's what they know, that like the power of doing like really tuning in to your consciousness in order to manipulate reality uh to your own advantage. Um, maybe there's some fundamental truth in that, that like if more people did that for the common good,
Yeah.
we would actually shift the whole kind of like playing field of reality.
Which means that our job, like literally, maybe you as a man, is to help paint that picture of what that future, what that reality like could be. You know, see what I'm saying? Like, if we can help people to truly believe that you can get this other way of life, like it's almost like we have to truly believe that we can change the system in a way that we have to paint that other picture. Then that's maybe the only path forward. Yeah.
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 That's a nice place to
That's
wrap it up
fascinating.
for
That's
today, I
fascinating.
think.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, good. That's been a beautiful long conversation with you, Tom. I've really enjoyed this one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
likewise.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.